New York, the final night of 2009. Inside a luxury apartment in Manhattan, a 9-year-old girl opened the bathroom door and found her mother, Shele Danishefsky Covlin, dead in the tub. No screams, no visible wounds, just death sudden and cold. Just days earlier, on December 25th, Shele had spent Christmas with her 2 children. She was preparing to ring in the new year, surrounded by family, but she never got to see the first day of 2010. At first, police ruled it an accident, maybe a fall, maybe a stroke. The case was closed too quickly. But something didn't sit right. A few small details didn't add up, and some investigators, they felt their instincts were trying to say something. Because why would a healthy, successful, and joyful woman like Shele suddenly die on the very night she planned to cut her ex-husband out of her will? But this wasn't the most chilling part, because more than 9 years later, as the truth unraveled layer by layer, what they discovered was shocking. The killer was none other than Rod Covlin, Shele's ex-husband. He didn't just kill her, he tried to frame their own daughter, the same little girl who had found her mother's lifeless body. This wasn't just a murder. It was a story of manipulation, greed, and the darkness hiding behind seemingly perfect families. And it all started with a death in the bathroom. Back in 1998, Shele Danishefsky, then 34 years old, was living in New York and steadily making a name for herself in the world of finance. As an investment advisor, Shele wasn't just smart and ambitious. She was also charismatic, warm, and full of life. She had a way of drawing people in, not flashy, just naturally magnetic. After earning a degree in marketing, she quickly found her footing on Wall Street. And there, Shele thrived. Not just because of her talent, but because of how she treated each client like family. Colleagues respected her, a woman who was professional, efficient, and deeply trustworthy. By the late 90s, Shele had become the very image of independence and success. But behind all that achievement was a quiet loneliness. In her early 30s, Shele had yet to find a life partner. And like many strong women, she thought, it's time to build a family with someone who shares my values, my dreams. She wanted to love and be loved the right way. February 1998. At a Jewish singles event in Hell's Kitchen, Manhattan, Shele met Rod Covlin. He was 25, nearly 11 years younger than she was. Yet from the very first glance, Shele felt it was destiny. Only hours after the party, Shele phoned her sister to say she was about to fly to Las Vegas to marry Rod. Eve, her sister, tried to talk her down, but Shele was swept away too fast, too deep. A few weeks later, they were engaged. Despite the age gap, the whirlwind, and every cautious voice around her, Shele trusted what she felt. Rod was the partner she'd been searching for. In September 1998, just 7 months after their first meeting, they held a small, intimate wedding surrounded by friends and family. 2 years later, in 2000, their first child arrived, baby Anna. In the beginning, everything seemed perfect. Both Shele and Rod were Jewish, shared the same faith, and were actively involved in their community. Shele came from an Orthodox Jewish family, and Rod also appeared deeply committed to their shared beliefs. They built a home together in Manhattan, filled with laughter, hope, and the belief that this was a fresh start. At first, everything seemed to be going smoothly, but over time, deep differences began to emerge. They soon realized they didn't have as much in common as they had thought when they rushed into marriage. Back in 1998, Shele remained devoted to her career and eventually rose to become Senior Vice President of Private Wealth Management at UBS, a prestigious role that reflected her talent and ambition. Rod Covlin, on the other hand, couldn't have been more different. After failing to establish a successful career as a stockbroker, He began relying on Shele's wealth to sustain his lifestyle. Shele had once hoped that Rod would succeed, even going so far as to financially support some of his business ventures. But without real drive or discipline, every effort collapsed. At first, Shele accepted his failures out of love, showing patience and compassion. Yet over time, the cracks in their relationship deepened. Rod began to spiral into gambling, specifically a game called backgammon, and it quickly became an obsession. His early wins convinced him he could make a living off the game. He traveled across the country to attend tournaments and spent countless hours practicing at home. But that wasn't the only problem. Rod started living a double life, secretly messaging and flirting with nearly 40 women on Facebook, many of whom he met at tournaments. Some were fellow players he had questionable relationships with. By that point, backgammon and extramarital affairs had completely consumed Rod's focus, more than his wife or their young daughter ever did. As if the cracks in their marriage weren't already deep enough, Rod's behavior became increasingly unstable. He would erupt in fits of unprovoked rage, and Shele began to suspect he might be suffering from bipolar disorder. But Shele's pain didn't end there. During a pregnancy with twins, she experienced a devastating trauma. One baby died in utero, and the other passed away shortly after birth. Doctors told Shele she would no longer be able to conceive naturally. Despite the heartbreak, the couple still clung to the hope of growing their family. In 2006, they turned to an egg donor, and that's how they welcomed their son Miles, a small glimmer of light in an otherwise fractured home. However, Rod's behavior grew even more toxic. He often blamed Shele for having to use an egg donor, and worse, he told their young son that Shele wasn't his real mother. By 2008, after 10 years of marriage, Rod and Shele's relationship had completely unraveled. The final blow came when Rod made a shocking suggestion: an open marriage. For Shele, a devout Orthodox Jewish woman, this was unthinkable. She refused, firmly and without hesitation. But Rod didn't care. He continued cheating, even going so far as to join JDate, a dating site for Jewish singles, using a fake name, James Early. At that point, Rod didn't even bother hiding his betrayal. It was all happening right in front of Shele's eyes. By January 2009, Shele was emotionally and physically drained. In a vulnerable moment with her sister Eve, she finally admitted a deep fear that Rod might become dangerous, not just to her, but to their children as well. By April of that year, Shele made the decision to move out and live separately, hoping to shield her children from the toxic environment. However, not wanting to completely sever the father's bond with his kids, she rented another apartment just across the hall in the same building and asked Rod to move there. At first, they tried to keep things civil for the children's sake, but in less than a month, Rod took it upon himself to move his belongings back into Shele's apartment, violating her privacy and crossing boundaries. By mid-May 2009, Shele realized things were truly over, and she officially filed for divorce. Rod was forced to return to the apartment across the hall, and Shele, after years of enduring emotional pain, began to recover. She threw herself into her career, focused on raising their 2 children, and even began dating again. While Shele was slowly reclaiming her life, Rod grew increasingly enraged. He launched a vindictive campaign to make her miserable. During their marriage, Rod had secretly installed a hidden camera in the hallway and planted spyware on Shele's computer tracking her every move. But it didn't stop there. Rod continued to smear Shele's name, contacting her boss to falsely accuse her of drug use and stealing money from their joint bank account. Shele had only withdrawn $800, while Rod had taken $7,200. His attempt to get her fired failed. Shele's boss knew her well and didn't believe a word of it. On the evening of July 8, 2009, Rod, who still had a key to Shele's apartment, took the kids out, but didn't return them by 8 p.m. as promised. Shele called and texted him repeatedly, but Rod ignored her. Fearing for her children's safety, she called the police. Rod never took the kids out to have fun like he claimed. Instead, he brought them to Columbia Presbyterian Hospital, where he falsely accused Shele of child abuse and neglect. Fortunately, doctors and child protection staff quickly saw through the lies. The children were safely returned to Shele by 5:30 the next morning. But Rod still wouldn't stop. The next morning, he filed yet another false report, this time with the NYPD Special Victims Unit, again accusing Shele of abusing the children. Once again, investigators quickly found the allegations baseless and closed the case. But this time, Rod's tactics backfired. The judge overseeing the divorce proceedings restricted his custody rights, ordering that all future visits with the children be supervised by the court. He was also ordered to pay $425 in monthly child support. When Rod claimed he couldn't afford the payments, the judge prohibited him from spending money on gambling or backgammon, which only enraged him further. Rod's fury finally turned physical. He grabbed Shele by the throat and threatened to kill her. Fearing for her safety and the safety of her children, Shele immediately sought a protective order from the court. By that point, Rod was still listed in Shele's will. But on December 29, 2009, Shele made a firm and final decision. She instructed her estate attorney to remove Rod's name from the will, officially cutting the last legal tie between them. The next day, December 30th, Shele left the kids at home with a babysitter and went on a date with a man she had recently met on J-Date. When she returned home, she played with her children and tucked them into bed. At 10:13 p.m., she logged into her J-Date account one final time, then shut down her computer. The following morning, December 31st, Shele had planned to meet with her attorney to finalize the will amendment. But at 7 a.m., her 9-year-old daughter, Anna, woke up and went looking for her mom. When she opened the bathroom door, Anna screamed in terror. Shele was lying face down in a pool of blood. The little girl immediately called her father, Rod Covlin. Rod arrived quickly at the apartment. He pulled Shele's body from the bathtub, called 911, and began performing CPR. But it was too late. Shele Danishefsky was unresponsive. When police arrived at the scene, first responders were already present and reported that Shele was found in the back bathroom. As investigators entered the apartment, Rod told them he believed his ex-wife had slipped while taking a morning shower and hit her head on the tub. He even pointed to a small cabinet above the bathtub, suggesting that a loose hinge might have caused her to lose her balance. At first, Shele's death was treated as a tragic accident. Anna, the one who discovered her mother's body, and Rod, the first adult to reach the scene, were only briefly questioned. Soon after, the police wrapped up the scene and delivered the devastating news to Shele's family. But once he returned to the precinct, Detective Stephen Rottermill couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Though everything initially pointed to an accident, a few key details made him uneasy. The position of the body, the broken cabinet hinge, and most notably, the bruises and abrasions on Shele's face, lips, and right arm didn't align with a simple bathroom fall. As the investigation deepened, detectives reviewed Shele's activity the night before her death. One particular detail stood out, raising even more red flags. Shele had just undergone a keratin hair treatment and had been explicitly told by her stylist not to get her hair wet for at least 72 hours. This led to a critical question. If Shele knew she couldn't get her hair wet, why would she take a shower that morning? Rod told police he had pulled Shele's lifeless body out of a blood-filled bathtub. But there was one glaring problem. His crisp white shirt was spotless, completely clean. That detail immediately raised eyebrows. When Detective Stephen Rothermel examined the scene, he made a controversial choice. He opted not to order a full forensic investigation, deciding instead to wait for the autopsy results. But that autopsy never happened. Shele's family were devout Orthodox Jews, and they strongly opposed an autopsy on religious grounds. Without a forensic report, Rothermel had no evidence to pursue. The case was closed and officially ruled an unexplained accident. Shele's sudden death shocked everyone, but just like Rothermel, her family and friends weren't convinced. Her sister Eve stated, "Shele never took baths. She always used the shower." Close friend Stephanie Goldman confirmed that, adding that Shele didn't even take quick baths, let alone one early that morning. Even after Shele was laid to rest, many believed she had been murdered, possibly by her ex-husband Rod Covlin. That suspicion grew stronger when Shele's real estate attorney, Lance Meyer, came forward with a critical piece of information. According to attorney Lance Meyer, Shele had scheduled a meeting with him on the very day she died to officially remove Rod from her will. If she passed away before that was done, Rod would inherit $5.2 million from her estate. That motive couldn't be ignored. Shele's family immediately requested the case be reopened. But both Detective Rothermel and his colleague, investigator Francis Brennan, gave the same response. The case had been officially closed. Police explained that the only way to reopen the case would be to conduct an autopsy. But that wasn't possible due to the family's religious objections. With no other options, Shele's family hired private investigator Michael Swain, hoping he could uncover the truth behind Shele's suspicious death and determine whether Rod Covlin had any involvement. When private investigator Michael Swain stepped into Shele's apartment, he immediately noticed several troubling details. The bathroom cabinet hinge appeared to have been yanked loose with force, not something that would have popped off accidentally. Given Shele's petite frame, it was nearly impossible for her to have caused that kind of damage, even in a fall. Swain also observed that there were no towels in the bathroom, which contradicted Rod's statement that Shele had gone in there to shower. 2 months after Shele's death, her family finally agreed to an autopsy, which was performed on March 1st, 2010. The result was shocking. Shele's hyoid bone was fractured, a classic indicator of manual strangulation. This discovery instantly shifted the entire direction of the investigation. In April 2010, Shele's official cause of death was finally changed from accidental to homicide. But it would take another 2 months before police were granted a warrant to search her apartment. The first person they reached out to was Melissa Shields, one of Shele's closest friends. Melissa revealed that she had met with Shele just hours before the tragedy, and something had felt seriously off. When Melissa asked what was wrong, Shele confided that she believed her ex-husband Rod was watching her. Later, when Rod Covlin was summoned, he refused to cooperate with the investigation. Digging through Rod's phone records and emails from December 30th, investigators discovered he had been having an affair with a married woman named Deborah O., a basketball athlete from North Carolina. Deborah had flown to New York and spent the night with Rod on the very night Shele died. Rod claimed that he and Deborah had played backgammon until around 10:03 p.m. Then he left to handle something related to a tournament. At 4 a.m., Rod texted her saying he had accidentally fallen asleep. But surveillance footage from Shele's building revealed the truth. Rod was seen exiting the building at 4:13 a.m., only to return a few minutes later oddly, handing the doorman a Snickers bar. The act was strange, especially coming from someone as secretive as Rod. The estimated time of Shele's death was between 1:25 and 4:25 a.m., perfectly aligning with the window when Rod was off the radar and not in contact with Deborah. When questioned, Deborah did not say anything incriminating about Rod. She insisted he was innocent and provided no helpful details regarding Shele's death. By 2011, the investigation was still ongoing. Rod was denied access to Shele's estate and lost custody of their children, who were placed under the care of a family uncle. Not long after, Rod's parents discovered he had secretly withdrawn $84,000 from his daughter's college fund. He used the money to travel with Deborah and enter various gambling tournaments. Tensions exploded. Eventually, Rod and Deborah were kicked out of his parents' home. Angry and desperate, Rod began plotting to murder his own parents, hoping to regain custody of his children and access Shele's remaining assets. At first, Rod planned to poison his parents by convincing his daughter Anna to slip toxins into their tea. But when that plan failed, he turned to a more direct approach, breaking in through the basement window, murdering his parents, kidnapping his children, and setting the house on fire to destroy all evidence. In some versions of the plan, Rod even tried to recruit Deborah. Though she knew about the plot, she refused to take part and begged him to stop. Meanwhile, investigators were steadily building a case against Rod. Sensing the walls closing in, Rod tried to shift the blame onto his own daughter, Anna. He faked a confession email from her account, claiming that Anna had accidentally killed her mother during an argument in the bathroom, all over a supposed romantic relationship. By 2014, Deborah had grown fearful of Rod. Their relationship quickly fell apart, and Rod ended it himself. But that decision would prove to be the biggest mistake of his life. Feeling betrayed, Deborah finally contacted the police and revealed everything she knew, from Rod's murder plots and past crimes to the disturbing confessions he once shared. With this crucial cooperation, the police finally had enough evidence to act. Rod Covlin was arrested on November 1, 2015, just 2 months before the 6-year deadline, after which he could have collected $5.2 million from Shele's estate. Deborah didn't stop at just testifying. She also turned over a hard drive containing data from Rod's electronic devices. That evidence directly linked him to Shele's death, proving that he had murdered her not just for the money, but also to gain custody of their children at any cost. In 2016, Rod Covlin was officially charged with second-degree murder, and his trial began in 2019. A 12-person jury sat quietly, listening to the testimony at the Manhattan Supreme Court in New York. Prosecutors argued that Rod had been planning to kill Shele for a long time, and it was only a matter of time before he acted.
Although most of the evidence was circumstantial, they insisted that Rod was the only person with a clear motive to murder Shele Danishefsky.
One of the key witnesses was Patricia Swenson, Rod's former girlfriend. She testified that during a trip in August 2009, Rod flew into a rage while talking about his ex-wife, repeatedly declaring that he wanted to kill her. As the trial continued, more incriminating evidence was presented. Despite the defense team's best efforts to claim Rod's innocence, the jury found him guilty after 8 weeks of trial. On April 10, 2019, Rod Covlin was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison without parole for the murder of Shele Danishefsky. Rod attempted to appeal the conviction, but the Supreme Court rejected his request. He is currently serving his sentence at Attica Correctional Facility in New York, where he will spend the rest of his life behind bars with no chance of parole. If this case shocked you or stayed with you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next chilling story. We bring you true crime cases, unsolved mysteries, and killers hiding in plain sight every night.